The Galactic Council of Unified Sentient Species had, in its 4,000-year history, faced 17 extinction-level crises, 3 interdimensional paradoxes, 2 rogue AI uprisings, and 1 truly catastrophic incident involving a species of telepathic fungi that nobody ever talked about anymore. They had survived all of it, barely in some cases, with significant property damage in most cases, but they had survived. None of those events had ever prompted Councillor Vreth of the Sulani Collective to actually faint at the podium. Today was different. The Kreth Dominion, said Senior Analyst Pova, her 4 eyes blinking in rapid, anxious succession as she addressed the emergency assembly, has issued a Class 7 ultimatum to every signatory species in the galaxy. They are demanding full territorial surrender of the Outer Rim systems, immediate disbandment of all independent defense fleets, and complete transfer of all biological research archives, including the classified ones. She paused, looking around the room as if hoping someone would tell her she'd read it wrong. Nobody did. They have given us 48 galactic standard hours. The silence that followed was the specific kind of silence that happens when an entire room full of extraordinarily intelligent beings simultaneously realizes that they are, comprehensively, finished. Then everyone started screaming at once. Councillor Vreth of the Sulani Collective suggested immediate compliance. Councillor Brix of the Theran Assembly suggested military resistance, which prompted Councillor Yenna of the Malorian Reach to remind him, with barely restrained fury, that the Theran military consisted of 47 ships, 32 of which were currently docked for maintenance. Ambassador Dulo of the Fringe Worlds said something so profoundly pessimistic in his native language that the translation algorithm simply rendered it as "we are all going to die," which was probably accurate enough. And High Mediator Sael, who was supposed to be the calm, rational center of the entire council, was sitting in her elevated chair, with her head in all 3 of her hands, making a sound that no translation algorithm had ever successfully categorized. It was, in the technical diplomatic terminology of 17 civilizations, a complete disaster. It was Councillor Brix who eventually said what everyone was thinking. Not because he was the bravest or the most strategic, or even particularly clever. He said it because he had consumed 3 cups of a stimulant beverage before the session, and his filtering mechanisms were simply not functioning at full capacity. What about Earth? The room went quiet again. Different kind of quiet this time. The kind that happens right before something either very good or very bad occurs, and nobody can tell which yet. Absolutely not, said Vreth immediately. Out of the question, agreed Yenna. We swore an oath, said Sael, lifting her heads from her hands with an expression of genuine alarm. The Non-Interference Compact. The Veil Protocols. We do not involve Earth. That is not a suggestion, Brix. That is a fundamental cornerstone of galactic. The Kreth Dominion has 700 warships, Brix said flatly. We have collectively 93. What exactly is your plan, Sael? Nobody had a plan. That was the problem. The Kreth Dominion had spent the last 2 centuries quietly, methodically building the largest military force in the known galaxy, and they had done it so gradually, so patiently, that by the time everyone else noticed, the window for stopping them had already closed. They weren't reckless. They weren't emotional. The Kreth were methodical, cold, and extraordinarily good at winning wars, which they had demonstrated 6 times in the past 300 years. We cannot involve Earth, Vreth said again, but her voice had dropped from firm to something closer to pleading. Do you understand what that would mean? Do you understand what they would do? Yes, said Brix. They would probably save us. That's the part that terrifies everyone, isn't it? It was. Here is a thing that most of the galaxy knew but never ever discussed out loud. Humanity was not supposed to be what it was. When the Council's long-range observation teams had first catalogued Earth, roughly 300 years ago, the initial reports had described a species in early industrial development, resource competitive, tribalistic, moderately aggressive, and almost certainly going to self-destruct within 2 centuries. Standard Class 4 assessment. Nothing special. File it, monitor it, move on. Then the monitoring teams started sending increasingly strange updates. They didn't self-destruct. That was the first surprise. They came, by most projections, extremely close, multiple times, and then somehow pulled back from the edge each time through a combination of last-minute negotiation, collective panic, and what one bewildered analyst had described as sheer irrational stubbornness in the face of statistical inevitability. They unified, slowly, messily, with enormous amounts of argument, and at least 2 more near catastrophes, but they unified. They developed faster than light travel, a full century ahead of the projected timeline. And then they started expanding, carefully and deliberately, into their solar neighborhood. The Council had upgraded them to Class 2, and quietly begun the Veil Protocols, which was the polite term for a sophisticated, galaxy-wide conspiracy to ensure that humanity did not yet know the full extent of what was out here. This was, in hindsight, a decision that made complete sense at the time and grew more complicated with every passing year, because humanity kept improving. Their military technology, which had begun as charmingly primitive, had evolved at a rate that made the Council's own scientists deeply uncomfortable when they discussed it. Their warship designs were, by any objective metric, bizarre, over-engineered, and obsessed with redundant systems and contingency planning to a degree that other species found almost philosophically exhausting. Their soldiers were, and this was the part that truly unsettled observers, enthusiastic, not in the bloodthirsty way of the old Kreth warrior caste. In a way that suggested they found the whole enterprise of tactical problem-solving genuinely, personally engaging, like it was interesting to them. One classified council report, authored by a very stressed Malorian intelligence officer named Fiend, had described humanity's approach to warfare as creative in ways that should be illegal, and possibly are, in 17 jurisdictions. Fiend had requested a transfer to agricultural oversight immediately after submitting the report. The request had been granted without question, so yes, everyone knew about Earth, and everyone had agreed, with great solemnity and a unanimous vote, to never ever involve them in galactic affairs until humanity was ready, whatever that meant. Nobody had ever fully defined it. "We don't even have a contact protocol," Yenna said, but she was pulling up files as she said it, which rather undermined the objection. "We have 17 contact protocols," said Pova quietly. "The Council has drafted and revised them periodically for the past 140 years. Protocol 7A was updated 8 months ago." Everyone looked at her. "I maintain the archives," she said, with the slightly defensive air of someone who had been waiting a long time for this information to become relevant. "We are not doing this," Sale said, standing up from her elevated chair, with the energy of someone who had decided to be the last responsible adult in the room. "The Kreth ultimatum is a crisis, yes, a serious one, but introducing humanity to the full scope of galactic civilization, under duress, in secret, as a military favor. Do you have any concept of how that interaction could unfold? Any concept at all? We know almost nothing about how they respond to— We know quite a bit, actually." The voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned. The being standing in the archway was Counselor Omath of the Deep Fringe Observers, a group so reclusive and specialized that most of the Council tended to forget they existed between sessions. Omath himself was tall, gray, unhurried, and currently holding a data tablet with the calm expression of a person who had known this day was coming and had prepared accordingly. "I apologize for my late arrival," he said, walking to the center of the assembly floor as if he owned it. "I was contacted by my field team 6 hours ago and came as quickly as transit allowed. My observers have been monitoring the human expansion zone for the past 19 years. He placed the data tablet on the central display surface. "I think you should see what they've been watching." The display filled with footage. It was, at first glance, a standard military training exercise. Human soldiers, moving through what appeared to be a simulated urban environment, coordinating with hand signals, low verbal communication, the efficient practiced motion of people who had done this thousands of times. Nothing unusual. Nothing the Council hadn't seen in their standard observation reports. Then you noticed the details. The tactical communication was partially encoded in a system that Omath's team had spent 11 months trying to decrypt, and had ultimately classified as a proprietary human development that their algorithms could not fully parse. The equipment the soldiers carried included, in addition to standard armaments, devices that the observer team had provisionally identified as 3 separate types of technology that the Council's own research divisions had theorized about but not yet produced. Provisionally, because the humans had apparently built them with enough informal modifications that they were difficult to recognize as what they were. And the soldiers themselves, moving, communicating, adapting to the simulation in real time, were doing something that the Malorian analyst assigned to the footage had circled in red and annotated with the words, "How are they doing that?" "The adaptation rate," Omath said simply. "Their tactical adaptation rate in contested environments is approximately 4 times the galactic standard, and that figure is from 19 months ago. My most recent data suggests it has increased." The room was very quiet. "The Kreth," Brix said slowly, "have never fought anything like them." "No," Omath agreed. "They haven't." "Neither have we," Yenna said, and her voice had taken on a quality that sat somewhere between awe and genuine fear. "No," Omath said again. "We haven't." He looked around the room. "Which is exactly why this decision should not be made lightly or quickly or without understanding what we are contemplating." He paused. "But it should be made, because the alternative is the Kreth Dominion controlling this galaxy. And I think we can all agree that is a worse outcome than the one where we find out, at last, what humanity does when someone else starts the fight." Sael sat back down slowly. Vreth had her eyes closed. Dulo, who had not said anything optimistic in living memory, said, very quietly, in perfectly translated standard, "Make the call." The contact protocol, as it turned out, was a 12-page document that began with the sentence, "In the event that galactic circumstances necessitate first contact under non-ideal conditions," which was possibly the most aggressively understated opening paragraph in the history of diplomatic literature. Pova had pulled it up on the central display and was reading through it with the focused expression of someone diffusing something that might explode. "It says we should begin with a formal greeting transmission in 17 human languages," she said. "We don't have time for 17 languages," Brix said. "It says we should offer gifts symbolizing peaceful intent. We don't have time for gifts either. It says, under no circumstances, should the first contact be framed as a request for military assistance, as this may cause the human representatives to feel manipulated, which could." "Pova," Sael said, with the strained patience of someone who had already accepted that today was going to be awful and was simply trying to manage the degree. "Summarize." Pova looked up. "It says don't lie to them, don't condescend to them, and don't make them feel like they're being used." She set the tablet down. "Everything we are about to do is specifically listed as what not to do."
Wonderful. Truly wonderful.
The Council of Unified Sentient Species, 4,000 years of collective diplomatic experience, 17 successfully negotiated interspecies frameworks, and they were about to make first contact with humanity by calling them up and saying, essentially, "Hello, we've been watching you for 3 centuries. Sorry, we never mentioned it. There's a situation, we need your warships. Good luck." Ambassador Dulo, against all personal precedent, laughed. It was a short, slightly unhinged sound, but it was technically laughter, and several council members turned to look at him with genuine surprise. "Send the transmission," he said. "Whatever happens next, at least it will be interesting." The signal was routed through 3 relay stations and a borrowed fringe observer satellite that Omath had quietly positioned in human communication range approximately 2 years ago. Because Omath, it was becoming increasingly clear, had been thinking about this possibility for quite some time. The transmission reached Earth's Unified Defense Relay at approximately 0340 hours, Greenwich Meridian Standard, which was not an ideal time to reach anyone. But the Kreth ultimatum clock did not particularly care about human sleep schedules. The response came back in 11 minutes. 11 minutes. For a species receiving confirmed alien contact for the first time in their history. That was, and Omath's expression when he checked the response timer, was one of quiet, private vindication, extremely fast. The voice that came through the translation filter was female, measured, and had the specific quality of someone who had been awake for approximately 40 seconds and was performing composure at a very high level. "This is Commander Ria Osei, Unified Defense Relay Station 7. I'm confirming receipt of your transmission. I want to be transparent with you. I've escalated this contact to the highest available authority, and I've been asked to keep you engaged while that escalation processes." A pause. "So, you've been watching us for 300 years. Sael, who had taken the communication chair because someone had to and nobody else wanted to, said carefully, "That is broadly accurate, yes." Another pause from Commander Osei. "And you're calling now because you need help. We are facing a significant military threat. Yes, right. The sound of background activity, muffled voices, the particular organized urgency of a facility shifting into high gear. I have to ask, and I want you to know I'm asking this in a completely professional capacity, and not because I'm personally offended. Did it occur to anyone over there to maybe give us a call before the emergency? Saul looked at the assembled council. The assembled council looked at the floor, the ceiling, their own hands, anywhere that was not Saul. That is a fair question, Sale said, and I want to assure you it will be addressed thoroughly in the post-crisis review. Aha. Commander Osei did not sound especially reassured. Okay, hold please. They held for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, during which time the council chamber was so quiet that you could hear Vreth's secondary respiratory system cycling with anxiety. Then a new voice came on. Male, unhurried, with the kind of weight that accumulates in people who have made large decisions for a long time. This is Secretary General Adeze Makinde's office. I'm Chief of Staff Tariq Wolf. The Secretary General will join shortly. While we wait, I've been asked to gather operational specifics. He already sounded like he was taking notes. How many ships does the Kreth Dominion have? 700 warships of varying classification. Pova answered, because she had the numbers ready, and Sale looked like she was still recovering from the hold please. How many do you have? 93, combined across all council species. A brief pause, not shocked, just noting. And they've given you 48 hours. How much of that is left? 31 hours, approximately. What's their current position? Omath pulled up the navigation data and transmitted the coordinates. Wolf confirmed receipt without missing a beat. In the background, more voices, more movement, the sound of a large organization waking up and orienting itself with remarkable speed. One more question, Wolf said. Is this a declared war, or a coercive ultimatum? Councillor Brix frowned. Does that distinction matter? It matters for our operational posture, Wolf said, which told the council approximately nothing, and somehow told Omath, who had spent 19 years studying humans, quite a lot. Coercive ultimatum, Sale said. No formal declaration. Good, said Wolf, and the single word carried a satisfaction that made several council members exchange uncertain glances. Then, Secretary General Makinde is ready. The voice that came next was calm in the way that deep water is calm, not absence of depth but presence of it. Councillor Sael, said Secretary General Adeze Makinde. I've been briefed. I have some concerns about the history of this relationship that I intend to raise at length, at a later time, in a conversation I expect will be uncomfortable for everyone involved. A pause. But right now I have a more immediate question. When the Kreth Dominion issued this ultimatum, did they know about Earth? The council chamber went still. It was, in retrospect, an obvious question. It was also a question that nobody had thought to ask, because they had been so focused on the problem of contacting humanity that they had not stopped to consider what the Kreth did or did not know about what they were contacting humanity for. Omath was already checking his intelligence files, and his expression as he scanned them shifted through several distinct stages before settling on something that looked uncomfortably like impressed. No, he said slowly. The Kreth do not have significant intelligence on Earth. Our Veil protocols obscured humanity from their observation networks as thoroughly as from anyone else's. He looked up. They don't know you exist. They don't know we exist, Makinde repeated, and there was something in her voice that the translation algorithm rendered as thoughtful, but which Omatha suspected was significantly more than that. No, he confirmed. Then, she said, we have a negotiating position. Brix opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You want to negotiate? With 700 warships? I want to solve this problem with the fewest casualties and the most durable outcome, Makinde said, with the patience of someone explaining arithmetic to a distracted student. Military engagement is one option. It is not the only one, and it is rarely the cleanest. Another pause. I'm going to need full intelligence files on the Kreth Dominion, their leadership structure, their strategic priorities, their economic dependencies, and anything your observers have on internal political divisions. She said it, the way someone might request a cup of coffee. Routine. Expected. Can you have that to my office in 2 hours? Pova was already pulling archives. Yes, she said. Good. My defense staff will be in contact with your military liaisons within the hour regarding fleet positioning. I want our ships in the region before any communication with the Kreth begins, because I want them to be a fact that exists before they're a surprise." She paused one more time. "And Counselor Sale, I do want to be clear that humanity is engaging with this situation as a matter of choice and shared interest, not as a debt we owe to a council that kept us in the dark for 3 centuries. We'll discuss what a genuine partnership looks like when the immediate situation is resolved." "Understood," Sale said quietly. "Good. We'll be in touch." The channel shifted, not closed, just moved into a working frequency that immediately began populating with data requests, coordinate transmissions, and the organized, efficient sound of a civilization that had spent 200 years preparing for exactly the kind of situation everyone had hoped it would never face. What happened over the following 19 hours was, depending on who you asked, either the most stressful or the most extraordinary sequence of events in modern galactic history. Probably both. Definitely both. The human fleet and the Council got its first unfiltered look at it during the deployment, which prompted Omath's lead analyst, a meticulous Solani named Drevu, to sit down abruptly in the middle of a corridor and simply stare at nothing for several minutes, materialized at the outer rim boundary in 3 coordinated groups, at positions that the Kreth had specifically calculated as approach dead zones. Somehow, the Kreth's own strategic planning files, which the Council's intelligence division had partially accessed at significant effort and expense, had identified those exact positions as defensively negligible. Humanity had chosen them deliberately. When the Kreth Dominion's lead strategist, a being named Vorkan Sel, who had won 6 wars and lost none, reviewed the human fleet positioning reports, he reportedly reviewed them 3 times before asking his staff if the data was corrupted. It was not corrupted. The human ships were real. They were numerous, and they were sitting in positions that meant any Kreth advance on the Council systems would have to pass through them, not around them, through them. Makinda's diplomatic team made contact with the Kreth political leadership 40 minutes after the fleet was in position. The lead negotiator was a man named Kaio Ibarra, who had the mild, slightly distracted manner of someone perpetually thinking about 3 other things, and the track record of someone who had successfully negotiated 9 territorial disputes, 4 hostage situations, and 1 incident involving a malfunctioning automated mining operation, and a very confused colony that had technically declared war on a company rather than a government. Ibarra was, by any measure, extremely good at his job. He opened by acknowledging that the Kreth ultimatum was, strategically speaking, well constructed. He said it genuinely, without irony, as one professional to another. Then he pointed out, with the same conversational mildness, that the Kreth leadership had made their calculations without accounting for a significant variable. A variable that was now positioned across their advance corridor, and would require them to revise those calculations substantially. He gave them 6 hours to do so. Vorkan Sel, who had never in his life been told to revise his calculations by a species he had not previously known existed, requested the 6 hours. He used 4 of them. The revised Kreth proposal dropped the territorial demands entirely, reduced the archive request to a negotiated research-sharing framework, and included, buried in subsection 9, a request for formal introduction to the human delegation's governing body for purposes of future diplomatic relationship development. Ibarra, reading it, reportedly smiled for the first time since the negotiations began. Drevu, back at the council chambers and monitoring the communication feeds, translated subsection 9 for the assembled council members, who took a moment to absorb it and then began making a noise collectively that Pova's documentation algorithm registered as cautious, exhausted relief. Vreth said, very softly, "They're afraid of them." "Yes," Omath said. "The Kreth have never been afraid of anyone." "No," Omath said, "they haven't." Counselor Brix was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We kept them hidden for 300 years because we were afraid of what they'd become." "Yes," Sael said. "And what they became," Brix continued, slowly, working through it, "is something that makes a species with 700 warships decide that a territorial ultimatum isn't worth the trouble." Nobody answered, because the answer was obvious, and everyone in the room was still, in their own way, processing it. The formal agreement was signed in 17 hours. The Kreth withdrew their ultimatum. The council systems remained intact. The research-sharing framework was, by most technical assessments, actually quite reasonable, and would probably produce useful outcomes for multiple species, which was the kind of development nobody had anticipated when the day began. And humanity, having resolved in under a day a crisis that the Galactic Council had considered potentially civilization ending, sent a final communication through Commander Osi's relay station that was, in its entirety, 3 sentences. Glad we could help. We'll expect formal council membership application materials within the month. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the Veil protocols. Sale read it twice. Set it down, looked at Omath. Legal team, she said. Yes, Omath said. They have a legal team. They have several, I believe. Sale was quiet for a very long time. Outside the council chamber's observation panels, the stars continued their indifferent burning, the same as they always had, the same as they would long after every species in this room had come and gone. The galaxy was very large, and very old, and had seen a great many things. It had not, until today, seen this particular thing. And something told her, something in the composed, professional, 3-sentence certainty of that final message, that it was going to be seeing a great deal more of it from now on. Draft a response, she said finally. Something welcoming, genuine. She paused. And tell the legal team to start reviewing the Veil protocols. All of them. That will take months, Pova said. I know, Sael said. Start anyway. Outside, the human fleet was already repositioning, not retreating, not dispersing, simply moving with the quiet, organized purpose of something that had somewhere to be, something to do, and absolutely no intention of being kept in the dark again. The galaxy, as it turned out, had not been ready for humanity. Humanity, as it also turned out, had been ready for the galaxy for quite some time. They'd just been waiting for someone to finally make the call.